Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting again with yet another in our series about the example projects that are given to you with Oracle Policy Modeling. This one is the penultimate one, so in the alphabet, it's the letter T this time. It's travel compensation, one of my personal favorites. I'm speaking to you in October 2022, and given that most of the year has been spent with lost luggage and delayed flights, it's something that I have found extremely useful. So it has a practical element to it as well. Let's learn about the travel compensation project and why it is good from a learning perspective. First of all, the context. It's really straightforward. This was built around some European Union legislation regarding compensation if you have been refused boarding or if there's been a delay or some other interruption to your voyage and you are traveling by air either between European countries or to or from a European country. So this is publicly available information, and the idea behind the interview is to guide you through the process of understanding whether you are eligible for compensation or not. So unlike normally, I'm going to start with the interview. You'll be asked details about your itinerary, where you're flying from, where you're flying to, when did you fly, what time, and so on. What's the problem? Were you on a cancelled flight? Was your flight delayed? And so forth. What airline operated the flight? And how far was the flight? Because in certain circumstances, the distance of the flight will cause the calculation to be different. And then we'll go further down to whether you were offered a rerouting, if you had a rerouted flight, where did it go to, and what time, rather, when did it leave? How soon or how late did you get notice of cancellation? And then there are a couple of exceptions related to French islands. And after that, it'll ask you for the price of the ticket before telling you about whether you're entitled to compensation or likely to be entitled to compensation. So it's really very straightforward. Once you've got that information, if you so wish, you can then proceed to give your details, attach proof such as the ticket stubs or the luggage tags, and finally, that's the end of the travel compensation calculator. So obviously, it's a very straightforward business scenario. Why is it a good one? Well, let's go to project example projects and have a look. It's obviously from the travel and transportation business, but it has a wide variety of different rules. It includes multiple translations. It is also uses test cases and can be easily adapted so that it maps to an Oracle B2C service instance, like we described in a previous chapter. So what do we need to take a look at from a rules point of view? Well, as it mentioned there in the list, there were some Excel rules. So these are very useful if you're new to Excel rules because they are good examples of how to structure an Excel rule. And you can see a list of member states and a member states for arrival, a list of carriers and their countries. So all the kind of base data is stored in Excel tables. And if I go to the second Excel table, you'll see it's an extension thereof. And we'll see a list of a list of airlines. And obviously this airline list cannot be exhaustive because, well, things change, and especially after the COVID pandemic and the financial crisis of 2008 and umpteen other things, this list no doubt has evolved. And that's one thing that we could look at, either keeping up to date or improving, which we'll come back to in just a moment. Still on the area of the rules, obviously the main document is that which references the EU regulations. So for your convenience, there is a Word document in here which will help you understand the basic rules behind eligibility for compensation. So as you can see, these have been taken from Wikipedia, so your mileage may vary in terms of whether these are the true rules or not, but the demo is a fantastic demo of writing out rules and mapping them to a document which is a source. So you can see that we used reference tags here to define the definition of Article 2. So helping a reader who knows the legislation understand the relationship between the legislation and the rules as we see them. And you can see that we've used reference tags all over the place. So other than that, well-structured rules, well-written rules, of course, this is a demo. And as you can see, good use of aggregators like all to avoid having to write clumsy phrases. And the other rules, as you can see, are interpreting date and time, handling drop-down lists, and various other minor points, which we've gone through in many other videos, but well worth a look if you're new to, for example, date and time is a good one because it, if we just open up the Word document, it uses functions like add hours, which are always useful to learn about how to express a difference between the start time and the end time, and also things like day difference if you're trying to work out the number of days notice that someone gave. So well worth a look if you're new to date and time functions, but we've gone into those sufficiently enough in other videos in this series that I'm not going to spend too much time in them. The data model, everything is global, as you can see, nice and straightforward. And the interview itself, we've already taken a good look at the interview, nicely organized into stages and a number of different screens. So what else do we need to talk about? Well, the first thing I would say that we need to talk about is that the basic project, as we saw earlier, the basic project relies upon a certain number of lists of static information to drive the interview. The obvious one being the list of airlines, but also when we look at the basic layout of the interview, it fails to capture information that might be useful. Let me give you an example. Here it says, where are you flying from? And you say, I'm flying from France, and then we're flying from Germany. Later on it says, okay, what's the distance in your flight, So if we had collected, for example, the airport here, we should be able to calculate the distance between the two airports. Those of you who've been following this video series will know that we looked in an earlier example, which was related, in fact, to finding a nearest retail store to you using a calculation called the Great Circle calculation. So that's how you calculate distances between 2 points in the real world, given that the Earth is in fact a curved object. It's a sphere, it's not a straight line. And we demonstrated in an earlier video that if you use a Great Circle mapper, you often get very different answers than if you just drew a line between 2 points and said how far is that. So if we'd asked which airport do you depart from, we probably could have got rid of this question, or at the very least accelerated this question by pre-populating it with the distance in kilometers between the two airports, rather than asking that the user goes and clicks on a link and goes off and finds the distance themselves. Another good example of where it could be improved, I think, is the airline list. You'll recall that a moment ago the airline list I showed you was an Excel spreadsheet. Well, that's going to get out of date very, very quickly. So it would seem, in theory at least, a good way of using, for example, external service to list currently active airlines. These are just examples. So in a slightly, shall we say, updated example, you can see here, if I, let's just refresh this page. I've added what is the departure airport. So if I'm departing from France, let's say I'm departing from Paris, and it lists the airports, and let's say I'm departing from Charles de Gaulle Airport. It's capturing the departure code, and let's say I'm going to Germany, I'm going to Hamburg Airport. Okay, it was on a standard aircraft and my flight was cancelled, and the airline which operated this flight, you'll notice that this is a drop down, so this drop down is piloted also by a custom extension. So this is an active list rather than a drop down list stored in an Excel spreadsheet, and we'll come on to that in just a second. We'll say that this was operated by Air France. And we can see that the flight distance has already been populated because it's actually the distance between CDG and Hamburg Airport. Other than that, the interview continues as normal, so I'm not going to go right to the very end. And now let's take a look at how that was done, just as an example. This was done in 3 parts. Let's start first of all with the airport search. The airport search used an airport search API. This is not a free API, so I can't show you my user key, but there are small or free subscriptions available for testing purposes. The second one we saw was the airline list, which is actually coming from the organization that manages the list of airlines. So in this case, you can freely obtain an API key from them for development purposes. And the third one was exactly the same provider, only this as the first one, except this is now a routing API. And they all, in this particular demonstration, use a simple jQuery AJAX call, but they could equally, and indeed should, I suppose, use the interview fetch technique to be able to hide most of this complexity from the JavaScript. But their goal is simply to produce output. This is a custom label. This is the custom search for the airlines. And this is a custom search for the airport. So we can derive from that you could use this technique in just about any interview extension that you could think of. So the travel compensation calculator, whether you use the generic example, the basic example provided, or whether you extend it, is an excellent learning tool. And not only that, it can actually save you time by finding out whether for real you have a claim to make when you are delayed or you have a flight that's cancelled. So dig into it, and I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Bye-bye.